Welcome back to another one of our series on the SBA data set analysis. In this data analysis, we're going to do part 2, and we're going to actually look at the data a little bit more. First about data preparation, understanding the data, categorical dimensions, geographic dimensions, dates, years, Boolean or Boolean-like fields, identification type fields. So these are topics we'll cover in this video because as you're going through the SBA data analysis, we have to actually start to understand the field. Before any analysis is done, I know a lot of people like to run in and do things. I always like to get an understanding of the data. I've seen all too often where somebody will run in and start doing an analysis of the data and they actually don't understand what the data means. So it's worth a point to actually just slow down and take a look at this data. Let's go to Tableau for a second. And here we have the data set in Tableau. Let me drag it over to the left. And we're going to go through some of these loans in this regard, like selected, not selected. We have to look at the case, what that means. But let's start with the first one, like loan number. So this looks like a loan number, not the amount of a loan. So this is not really a number. It could be a number, but it's more like a string in that regard. It's more like a social security number, not something you would add or average or those kind of things. We have to validate that, but I'm pretty sure that is. The same thing as name. You wouldn't aggregate name. It's just a string as well. Categorical dimension, really a dimension in that regard. So let's keep this on one side and we'll keep our presentation on the other side here and split the screen so we get a good understanding of the buckets that we have here. Because it's probably the right thing to do. So if we get into this, we have a big screen fortunately, and we start going through. So cities, certainly a geographical type thing because cities have it. State, also geographical. Zip code, also geographical, and not a number. You don't want to aggregate zip codes. You may aggregate everything for a state or a city, but not as zip codes. You don't want to add 90505 to 92103. That doesn't make any sense. And it's better that you don't do that because it's just, how would you aggregate telephone numbers? It doesn't really. It's not really logical. So more categorical dimensions. They have geographical basis, so they identify where on a map something goes. They can do longitude and latitude. The bank name, same kind of thing, categorical dimension. We're sitting out here. Bank state, interesting. We'll go back through these dates and whatnot if we go through things. And you can think that there's also leading indicators, like on zip codes. There's probably wealthy zip codes and not so wealthy zip codes. So those kind of things can go into your analysis. The bank state, local banks might have a better idea of the local business than, say, big national banks coming in from other states and everything. Like how much does North Carolina know about California? Maybe a lot. It's Bank of America, they probably have branches everywhere. It just depends. This one over here, the NAICS, it's not a number at all. This is really a string, and it should be a dimension. It's actually like a job description or job code in that regard. So it's the kind of jobs, they put them in categories for the SBA point of view. They want to know what it is, like real estate or video stores and those kind of things. This one's a little trickier. This has a date function in it. The date is not clear. 15074. So here you have approval FY, fiscal year approval, and it tells you it's 2001. But you can't get 2001 out of 15074. So somewhere we need a decoder ring to figure out exactly what 15074 means. But if nothing else for this analysis, you can certainly use the approval, the fiscal year, which is 2001. It depends when the fiscal year starts. But fiscal years from point of this analysis, at least initially, is probably acceptable. So you know that basically a term is 36 months. If it started in 2001, it would end 3 years later, right, in 2004 or so. Number of employees, well, this is going to be a number for sure, and a number that adds 1 through X, right, whatever that is. So 65 employees right here, those kind of things. So that's pretty important. You also may think about, if you look at the back, if we go through each one of these, maybe larger, you can build hypotheses, maybe larger organizations with more employees tend not to default as much because they're large as well-established companies. With people with one employee, where they have a single entrepreneur, a single person running the business, might be more at risk. These are hypotheses. You could think just the opposite. You could think shorter loan terms might be more riskier than longer loan terms. Longer loan terms, if you look at this, it's interesting. Well-established business, longer term loan. They don't want to deal with short-term loans, and short-term means you have to pay back over a short period of time. Your payment's going to be bigger. Bigger payments puts more stress on cash flow. New existing business, you have to look at the definition of that. Create jobs, does it create jobs? It created 3 jobs by giving a loan. So Small Business Administration has a job to create jobs. One of their goals is to create jobs in the community. Retain jobs, you're saving 65 jobs. Interesting on that one. Franchise code, this would require some investigation. What it is exactly what I was fearing. This is a code, probably not a number. It's probably more like a classification type of things. It's got some interesting numbers in there. It's franchise code, so a little bit of doing it. Now these numbers here on urban rural is whether it's either urban or rural or not defined. This is probably very important information. So it's more like it's a categorical, but it's really identifying type fields. What type of business is this? Is it urban business? Is it a rural business? Is it not defined business in that regard? So this is a Boolean yes or no type of things. It says yes or no. When zeros might just not be defined. And you gotta go back to the document. This also looks like a yes or no Boolean type field. Charge-off dates, not everybody's going to have a charge-off date, because then they didn't lose money and everything. But back again, you need your date decoder team to understand what 18,641 means, and then translate that from the SBA data set dates, right? And they have all the dates in this code that you're using for the SBA, but you're in the year 2001. It doesn't look like it's a Julian date either. So for understanding the data, so part of not having all the answers as we go through some of this, but you'll have to actually decode what some of these things mean. Like the SBA data file is dealing with these dates. A Julian date starts day 1 in a certain year. If you take 15,095 and divide by 365 years, it gives you an idea of when the start date was. And once you have the start date, you can calculate what the real dates are that you have here. Disbursement gross is how much money they gave. The balance is like any balance that you would have. This is more of a identification number, paid in full versus charge off, as you can see it, and you can see whether somebody paid or defaulted. I believe this is the charge off principal, probably how much they wrote off. The gross approval, SBA approval. So maybe the bank approved this much, but the SBA only approved 15,000 and backed 15,000 of the 30,000. So that's important to understand those numbers. And I'm just looking at these just to understand categorical variables. This, whether it's a new business or not, also just an identification type of number. They're just identifying. And so you don't really want to sum identification numbers in that regard. You just want to use those almost as if they're categorical dimensions. Real estate, same kind of thing. Is this more of a categorical dimension? Is it either backed by real estate or is not? You could do several things here. Some will count them. I guess you can see just summing them. It just tells you the number of real estate backed loans versus not real estate backed loans. This proportion belongs to the amount SBA approves versus the actual loan amount. In some cases it's higher, in some cases it's lower. Just indicates whether it's in recession or not in that regard. And some of these are calculation things that they put in, but just start with understanding that. The key ones that you don't really want to mess up with, obviously you have to figure out the dates and say what these dates mean. They're numbers, right? Divide by 365, there's a start date, and it counts day 1 from that start date. The loan actually was in 2001, so you can see that start date is going to be back X number of days from here. Don't be summing AICS numbers or zip codes, because it doesn't really make sense. It's more like job codes in that regard. So think about each one of these. And then furthermore, those are the key things we want to go through: geographic, dates, years, Booleans. You can certainly, for your initial analysis, stay to the years because it's cleared on the fiscal year. FY stands for fiscal year. And you can stay to that for the date field until you can actually decode the approval dates and everything. Then you want to actually take the next step is to understand what might affect some things, and then go through the key fields in each one of them. So, certainly, if you think about it, the loan number probably doesn't affect anything. It's just identifying a number. the name of the company, okay, other than creative marketing. The city, state, and zip probably do have something, and you can build hypotheses around this. There are rich zip codes and not so rich zip codes and challenged zip codes. So it's interesting. There'll be something to be said of zip codes, whether the loan values are high or the asset backed. There's probably a lot of information circulating around zip codes of success and failure. The bank state might matter as well because of getting loans from people who don't know California businesses or just writing business. That's something to think about. The NAICS is a categorical variable. It's kind of interesting to understand where they give the most loans, whether they give the least loans, which NAICS job role or job company type fails the most. That would be very interesting to know. Maybe you shouldn't go into business where a certain job type tends to fail often in those regards. So just think about those things in analysis. This is just part 2, as we'll continue to dive into the analysis. But like with any analysis, understanding the data is first and foremost. Building the actual visualizations is pretty straightforward, dragging ideas, dragging values into the columns, rows, and measures. But without an understanding of the data, you're not going to be able to think about things. You should be able to theorize on these data and say, okay, it didn't make sense that I would drag NAICS codes into the sum of a column. First of all, it's not really a number, it's a string, and it's a job classification or a company classification that the Small Business Administration uses to classify companies. So just consider that. Now, there could have value there, probably a lot of value now that you know that, because certain jobs and certain companies could default more than others. So there's probably a whole analysis right around that piece of it. It's the same as cities. Certain cities or zip codes might be more challenged zip codes for whatever reason, and could be several reasons. It could be the forest fires that went in there, and maybe the fires were wiping out businesses and those kind of things. So you got to think about what each one of these zip codes mean and how they're affected, and where some are successful and some are not successful, and the events that make them successful are geographic type of events. But just looking at the data, going through the data, and then taking your decoder. There was a catalog I showed in the last video that talked about each and every field and understanding what it is. But certainly before you continue on this, you'll want to come to grips with the dates and understand what those numbers mean, or at the very least, use the fiscal year where the approval was. Because once the loan's approved, it probably goes quickly to be dispersed after approval is given. So we'll go from there. We'll stop this presentation. I hope that this was meaningful for you.